These are the names of the people who will be speaking to you shortly. And this is Ezekiel Emanuel. He's an oncologist. And he wrote an article a couple years ago that has received quite a bit of attention. And our goal today is to think through that with you and to, I hope, provoke you to think about it on your own. Dr. Emanuel is an oncologist and likes to project, I say this on the basis of the images he chose to give of himself, a sort of virile, active image of someone in his prime. And he indeed is in his prime. But like the rest of us, he will die. So the question that Dr. Emanuel asks us to work through is what to do about that obvious fact, and in particular, whether we should hope to die before some particular stage or other. 75 was the number, the age that he chose to think about. The thesis of the article is that perhaps one should hope to die at 75. Emanuel contrasts two different approaches. On the one hand, we have the American immortal, someone who wants more, not just of calories, not just of land, but of life, to hold on to life for dear life, and to seek to extend it, perhaps at great cost. Emanuel contrasts this with his own approach, which is more moderate, and says, stop at 75. Or at any rate, 75 and don't ask for more at that point. His argument here is that though death, of course, is a loss, so too is living too long. You might think that there are deep sources of meaning after 75. And I think this is where Emanuel's argument gets interesting. He works through some of these and shows that those sources of meaning or of the good things in life appear to be on to the decline after age 75. So though of course there are people at the age of 75 who live vibrant, active lives, that is on the decline. Creative achievement peaks in nearly all fields well before the age of 75. So though of course there are the few composers here and there who do great things at the age of 85 or even 103, they are outliers. And this is one of the most interesting arguments, I thought. Even the source of meaning of posterity, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, there are costs here too with remaining and holding on to age. So Jan, where's Jan? He was talking about how great it is for his Singaporean colleagues to have their mothers and fathers still living with them. But there's a cost there too, as Emanuel points out, which is that when the matriarch or the patriarch is sticking around, there's no upgrade for you. That is, you don't get to be the matriarch or the patriarch yet. So there's a loss that happens from this holding on. There are practical and policy implications which we'll think through together. So here's a question I want to ask you. What do you think? Many of you read this article or you've heard the little overview I just gave. So here's what I'd like you to do, just to get a sense of where you all are thinking right now. If you're pro, I want you to put your arms up like this. And if you're con, go like this. So what do you think? Pro Emanuel's perspective, stop at 75. Or, no, hold on. What do you think? Can I get some hands? I think I'm seeing more pros than cons, but quite a few cons. So this is an opportunity for interesting conversation. So let's have that conversation. I welcome now two of my most valued colleagues. Jeanette asked, well, who do you want to chat with about this? And I was like, oh, definitely Anju and Matt. So please. So let's begin with the softball question, and then we'll get down to brass tacks. And my softball opener is what I always ask students when we start with an article and I don't know what else to say, which is just, what did you notice? What stood out to you here? And what were your initial reactions to this piece? Anju, would you like to start?
Sure. So I have to admit, I was a bit peeved when I read this article. So I found it, I felt that the author did a bit of a bait and switch, because he has this incredibly provocative title about why he hopes to die at 75, And then when you actually read the article, he doesn't want to stop at 75. He just wants to change the way he lives his life, which is maybe not as sexy a title, but that's what he's actually saying. It's a very reformist proposal that he has in his piece. It's not at all radical, I think. It's not revolutionary. He explicitly says he's not in support of physician-assisted suicide. He's not in support of euthanasia. So all of the things that I thought he was hinting at in his title are in fact things that he's adamantly opposed to. So yeah, disappointment was actually one of the strongest emotions I was feeling as I read through the entire piece.
I guess when I read the article, it struck me as the kind of article that could only have been written by an Emanuel, right? So Emanuel comes from a remarkable American family known for its record of achievements and for its activity and hyperactivity. And so the character of the article seemed to me infused with the ethos of the brothers Emanuel.
One theme in the article was the need for meaning or purpose in life after 75. And one of the central claims is that the source of that meaning on the decline. And I wondered what we should think about this argument, and if he's right in the empirical claims, does that in fact give us reason to not want to live past 75? And Matt, I think maybe you're catching on to something there. It's an achievement view of the good life, where there are things you want to accomplish, and if the purpose of life is to accomplish those things, then naturally enough, one shouldn't hope to live much longer after having accomplished them. So I wonder what to make of this style of argument. Are there sources of meaning beyond creative achievement, vibrant climbing of mountains, whatever it is that the brothers Emanuel like to do as they go through life? Has Emanuel missed out on sources of meaning, or is this just the wrong way to think about it as, oh, you rack up the things that you want out of life, and then when you're done, you're done?
I think resumes are good things, but life is much longer than one's resume. What can I say about that? I take it that there are two main claims about meaning that Emanuel expresses in that article. The first view is something to the effect of, I'll call it a productivity view of meaningfulness. A life is meaningful in virtue of its productivity or its achievement, right? So this is one point that seems to be a background assumption, that this is the source of meaning or goodness in a life. And then secondly, there's a different claim that gets linked to that first claim, which is a view I'll call the all or nothing principle, which is that when one's life lacks the source of meaning or value completely, then we should welcome death. It seems to me that those are two different claims, and that one could deny the first claim, accept the second claim, accept the first claim, and perhaps deny the second claim. But I do think, specifically on the question of whether there are sources of meaning other than productivity, well, of course there are. There are non-productive forms of leisure. These are good aspects of our lives that might be just as valuable or even more valuable than our productive goods.
I completely agree with everything that you just said, Matt. He has a line, and this is on page, for those of you who have the article with you, on page 4, he has this line where he says, creativity, originality, and productivity are pretty much gone for the vast majority of us after the age of 75. And so the way that Matt framed this, the central proposal that he's making, that really is the question, are those the only ways in which we should be thinking about meaning? And from my point of view, they're not. I think connectivity and contribution, not necessarily in a productive economic kind of way, should be just as valuable a way of giving meaning to your life. And every individual is going to have a different way of defining what that meaning is. And putting an arbitrary number, 75, onto that, I think has a lot of issues with it. I think of my own father, who is getting close to 80. He's a doctor as well, like Ezekiel Emanuel. And he's an incredibly productive person, even though he's retired from government service. he has chosen to make this time in his life about training the next generation of doctors and trying to reduce maternal mortality in my home state in India. And it's a different way of contributing from what he did in the past, but in no way do I think it as less than. And that's the other issue that I have with Emanuel, that he does seem to have this all or nothing approach that Matt was talking about, that anything that that isn't quantifiable, that isn't something that you can put into dollars and cents, doesn't really count. And again, I take issue with that.
I think resume building is a nice image to think of here as one possible model for looking for meaning in life. And the lesson I'm getting here is that, well, maybe we should look for alternative images to use. And resume building, in defense of Emanuel, I don't think it has to be quantifiable. After all, you could put university service or mentoring on your resume, but even thinking about it in that way is still a paper chase way of thinking about it. And perhaps it would be helpful to think about alternatives. Now, please, Matt.
If I can just add the point about the all or nothing principle, it seems to suggest that children, right, who do not have their full capacities for productivity and achievement, should they be sick, possess lives not worth saving.
What do you think?
So that has been one of the issues that have been raised by people with disabilities. That if you have a disability, then therefore you cannot be productive, and therefore you are less useful, less valuable, less worthy of being a full citizen. And I think that's a dangerous path to go down. We should instead be thinking about ways in which we can show other ways of contributing, other ways of living a full, meaningful life, even if you have a different set of abilities as compared to the norm. And Emanuel's argument, I think, can be taken in relatively dangerous ways to marginalize certain segments of our citizenry who don't fit into that neat box of being fully productive, fully creative, and fully energized.
The two approaches that Emanuel contrasts are the American immortal approach versus his, I suppose, American mortal approach. My first question, after all, we're in Singapore, and the three of us have lived here for now, we're almost beginning our 6th year. So we spent some time in the States, but we spent some time elsewhere too. And I wonder to what extent this approach that he describes as American, is there something American about that? And how could we think about this perhaps differently if we displace the center of our thinking from the US and perhaps think about it here? And how do these questions perhaps show up differently in this context, here in Singapore in particular?
Well, I'm not sure when he talks about the American immortal, if he's actually talking about an attempt to avoid death. The way I interpreted it instead was he's trying to resist the American immortal. The goal of the American immortal is to resist aging. It's the labels that we've attached to this phenomenon and process of aging that people are trying to run away from. And it's because aging is seen in such a negative light that people are more and more inclined to want to stop at 75. But if you change how you think about aging, then you don't have this problem anymore. And so all of the panels that came earlier today, which were talking about healthy aging, I think that's an alternative pathway that he isn't necessarily considering, but which actually be closer to the way that would allow a society to recognize that there are different phases in people's lives and different ways in which they can be fully part of society, but offering different things at different moments.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have to say, I don't know enough about Singaporean attitudes toward advanced aging, and that's something that I would be interested to learn more about. I guess I do see certain aspects of the character that Ezekiel is describing as the American immortal, maybe among younger people, insofar as I see a lot of focus, at least among many Singaporeans I know, as well as Americans who live in Singapore, concerns with fitness and health and eating well and all of these other things, which I don't think are in themselves bad things. I don't think actually being committed to those activities makes you an American immortal. That's one thing I would say. But maybe there is something of the character of the American immortal displayed in some of those practices.
One distinction that I find helpful when thinking about this is something from decision theory, which is the distinction between what's called maximizing and satisficing. So these are two broad approaches to a situation. Maximizing says if something's good, get more of it. So maximizing approach to money says, how much is enough? More. And this is, when it comes to money, a fairly common approach. Satisficing instead picks up an amount that is enough and then says, I will aim for that and be thankful for any more that comes, but in fact not even to aim or ask for more than that. And of course this can apply across many fields in life. So for example, when picking a mate, you have your criteria and you try to max out all the criteria, or you find someone who's good and then be happy with what you have. Or with a job, to try to move from job to get to the better, or you find a job that's good and then stick with it. So satisficing versus maximizing. I'm wondering if the American approach, we could characterize that, the American immortal, as a maximizing approach, more, you know, when it comes to calories, when it comes to square footage of a house, or even time, or Anju, I think the way you're thinking of this, it's not years lived, it's something else. And then I wonder if we can productively think of his proposal as just, don't maximize when it comes to this good thing, life lived, rather satisfice. So is this a helpful framework, and does that make his proposal more attractive or maybe less attractive?
Do you want to go first, Matt? Oh.
Sure. Well, it seems like he's against maximizing where longevity is concerned. He seems to want to maximize something like the range of capacities, right? And then he wants to satisfice maybe on longevity.
I'm thinking in terms of what are the policy implications with a satisficing approach. And so, for me at least, and this is what I was alluding to earlier, I was really struck by the fact that he wasn't supporting physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia, which I think would actually be an important part of this overall question. The idea that if somebody feels that they don't have any more meaning in their life for various reasons, it could be, as they say in the Netherlands, unbearable suffering. That's the bar that you have to reach in order to be allowed to have legal, state condoned physician-assisted suicide. So that's one possible criteria, but there could be other ways in which people determine that their life no longer has meaning for themselves. It could be the death of a spouse. It could be knowing that they are about to, they've begun early onset Alzheimer's or something like that. If one feels, I have lived a good enough life, I have satisficed my desire for meaning in my life, now I want to end it on my terms. From a policy point of view, is that something a state should support? And I tend to veer towards supporting that particular policy. And to me, that's one way of thinking about satisficing.
Well, let's think about these practical implications of the approach. There's the personal ones and then policy ones. And the personal ones that Emanuel talked about were things like after the age of 75, not being tested for certain things and not seeking to extend life. I'm wondering, Anju, I think you sort of thought of these as fairly anodyne and kind of innocuous. But I'm wondering what to make of these. Do they follow from his approach, or maybe even something more striking and robust follows from his approach? So Anju, you've outlined one. Other thoughts along these lines?
Yeah, I guess I found his specific policy proposals actually pretty reasonable, but one can accept them on grounds different from the Diet 75 approach. So my own favorite view, right, I think he gives us a false dichotomy here between, again, dying at 75 with one's full capacities intact, and then after that, welcome death, or else live forever, dragging on even though one might be in the condition of a turnip, right? This seems to be the alternative he's giving us, and it strikes me that actually those two views, the American immortal and the die at 75 approach, might actually have more in common than they seem to at first blush. The American immortal aims at hyperactivity, aims at productivity in a vain attempt to keep death at bay. Emanuel, with his die at 75 approach, has given up on the hope of attaining immortality, but he hasn't given up on productivity as the basis of assessing value. And so I would say that we could come up with a more moderate view, perhaps recognize that our capacities are on the decline after the age of 75, and recognize that the range of activity that we have available to us is constricted, but still take full advantage and take full enjoyment in whatever approximations to our capacities to function at their fullest that we still have at those times. I don't see why those can't be sources of value or of meaning past the time you are at your prime. And so I would say it makes sense to be concerned with funding for Alzheimer's because, right, you want to be able to take full advantage of your capacities even when they are on the decline. So his specific policy proposals seem to be consistent with other views about when a life is meaningful and about how long we would want to live.
I will say, and this is, I'm being slightly facetious when I say this. You perked up when I said that, Andrew. So why 75? I found it interesting why he chose that number.
76 is better.
76. So one of the statistics that he points out is, at least in the U.S., the average lifespan for men is 76, while for women it's 80. So why 75? It seems such a gendered, such a sexist age point, right? Why not 80? Or have a different point for women who are clearly going to live longer? Why can't we still have access to better health interventions until 80? So this is very minor, but again,
It might not be, I think.
Maybe it's not minor. Yeah.
Well, I was wondering when reading this piece and thinking about it, whether how much the questions that animate him are informed by his own position. So he's taught medicine at an Ivy League school for years. He's internationally renowned. I'm sure he's wealthy. He's a white American. He's doing all right on many different dimensions. And I wondered whether these are the questions that people in different positions, different places in the world, and in the social structure of our world, whether these are even the right questions to ask, the ones that he's asking, and perhaps even if those are the right questions, perhaps different answers might come. And that's just a question. I actually don't have a concrete sense of how this might vary if we start playing with those variables. Any speculative, facetious remarks about that?
I think it's a great point you're making, Andrew, because he is working on the assumption, this is not an assumption for him, this is his reality, which is he has a choice. He is choosing not to take those tests. He's choosing to say no to certain kinds of medical interventions. As he said, he's only going to take palliative care, he's not going to take curative care. What an incredible position of privilege that is, to be able to make that kind of a choice, to say no and mean it because you have the option of saying yes. The vast majority of the world does not sit in that reality. For the vast majority of the world, it's at 50, they don't have a choice. There are certain medical options not available to them because they're too expensive. And deciding policy on the basis of the most privileged of society, or the average person in society, or the least privileged in society, that the policy is going to look very different.
Matt, anything to add on that?
I don't have anything to add.
So we've thought through some practical consequences. Here's one that I was thinking about that he doesn't talk about in this article, which is planning for retirement. And I mean that in a very concrete financial sense. And I was thinking about this just seeing the bank display outside. And one very concrete question is whether this is possible. Are you in a position to plan to retire? And what your withdrawal rate will be. And is it supposed to be a 4% withdrawal rate such that you can keep on going forever? Or perhaps is it more reasonable to plan on downsizing pretty substantially after, say, 20 years of retirement, and then have an aggressive withdrawal rate, steeply climb upwards in your withdrawal rate as you approach 95, 90, whatever that arbitrary number you might pick? I'm sure all three of us are old enough now that we start thinking about retirement. Do you think of it in these terms?
I'm still in the accumulation stage.
Yeah, okay.
I'm still in the paying off debts phase. I do want to take your question seriously. I think again, this goes back to the question of thinking about costs of living. It's an important question that is in some ways just as important as the more subjective questions about meaning. And we shouldn't only focus on the meaning side of this equation. There are costs to the individual because it is costly to keep on living, and we cannot always assume that we have family members who can bear those costs for us. And it's also costly for the state and for society in general. And so as cold-blooded as that might seem, I think the question of when you decide to, letting yourself decide when you want to die in a manner that gives you as much dignity as possible and actually allows you not to be a burden, both emotionally as well as financially, on your loved ones, is an important one for all of us to be thinking about. So as much as I take issue with his article, one of the things that I do like about it is that it forced me to have that conversation with my husband and to think about, okay, what are the conditions under which I would like you to pull the plug? Or what kind of life do I think is meaningful? What kind of, how long do I want to live? So there are useful questions that are generated from this article, even though I disagree with where he ended up.
One of the final claims in the article is that dying earlier or preparing to die earlier will force us to engage these very subjective existential questions. And this might sound weird to come from somebody who teaches philosophy, but my immediate reaction was, wait, what's the value in that? Why should we be engaging these existential questions? And I wonder if maybe perhaps we can close by thinking about that. Is there some value to being forced to be engaged in these questions? And what's in it for us to be thinking through the meaning of life, what's it all for, and all that? I do this for a living, but I still have this other question in the back of my head, like, well, why? What's the good in that? Thoughts on this?
Well, you're a philosophy professor? No, I think there is some great value to considering one's mortality, coming to grips with the fact that one ultimately is not going to extend infinitely, at least in this body. I don't think that we need to accept Emanuel's thesis about when a life is worth living and when it's worth giving up to engage in those questions. And so the ancient Roman Stoics, for instance, recommended that this is something that we consider every day, that we should consider that every morning could be our last. And so, in fact, the question of confronting our mortality may well confront us, it may be more pressing than it might seem if we think that 75 is our cutoff. Every day something could happen to us that could mean the end of our lives. And so at least the Stoic thought was that if we kept in mind every day that each day could be our last, this concentrates our attention on the present moment and enables us to take full pleasure in whatever moments during the day and whatever goods it is that we happen to come across in that day. So the Stoic Epictetus says, let death and exile be before your eyes daily, and you will never have an abject thought, nor covet anything too eagerly. I think there's something right about that.
I can't that.
He wasn't reading it, Jeanette. This was memorized.
No. He said, Epictetus, so this is in the Enchiridion, says, let death and exile be before your eyes daily, and you will never entertain any abject thought, nor covet anything too eagerly.
Thanks, Matt. That's a nice place to close. The last thing we have here is a short film from a class I taught a few years ago. This was the final project for one of our students from the class of 2017, Rakesh. And I won't introduce the video, I'll just play it for you and let it speak for itself.
Prior to this course, I had a clear idea of how and when I would die. Over the course of my life, I would work towards a solo skydiving license. At the age of 75, when all my duties had been settled and all my offspring were in good shape to carry on with their lives, I would go skydiving and jump out of the plane with no parachute. This somewhat absurd notion of my death first came to my mind when I was about 17, but I haven't changed my mind drastically since then. I'm 22 now. What was my rationale? I don't want to turn into an old prune. More than anything that would disappoint me, to feel useless, and to be seen by others as useless. Regardless of all my efforts to learn, to cook, to travel, I would deteriorate to a state of onerous lethargy. I wouldn't be able to play sports or exercise as vigorously as I could before. I wouldn't remember all the knowledge I once had, and I wouldn't have the time or energy to pursue new projects. 75 marks the age of ultimate decline, a transformation of individual to the shadow of their former selves. This is not how I want to go. I don't want to become a liability for those who are obligated to look after me, and become a financial and time burden to everyone I cared for. At 75, I would be living on savings money and potentially my children's assets. Judging by my family history, I would be at good health at 75, but potentially prone to tremors. And with these aggravations of tremors, I would require a helper and regular medical attention. Out of obligation, my family will come to my aid, but I know I will be a burden to them. The government will come to my aid too. I will receive health care and pension money. But I cannot provide any growth to the economy. At best, I can only provide some sort of revenue for the adult diaper manufacturing industry. Death doesn't do me any wrong. Hedonistically speaking, the pleasures of my existence will be far outweighed by the pains. My existence will be reduced to hospital visits and days spent listlessly on the reclining chair, waiting for someone to attend to my stomach's needs. So why exist when you're not content with your existence? When I read Mr. Ezekiel Emanuel's article in The Atlantic, I understood his rationale off the bat. He was a young, vivacious man and wanted to be remembered that way. In his photos, he has his leg kicked up on the chair and he was drinking out of a mug which said, "The Boss." He may have tried to give rational arguments for why we have lived a full life by 75, but ultimately, he just didn't want to go out with one foot in the grave. He didn't want to look like Mr. Lee Kuan Yew when he showed up at the 49th National Day Parade. David Benatar says that even if my life is worth living, but I don't see the value of it, I'm not being irrational in desiring suicide. This may be the case when I'm 75. If I don't value my life, even if others do, it's time for me to go. I first said I would die at the age of 75. 2 weeks into class, I've extended my lifespan to 77 years. And I hear stories of people all around me doing so many productive things, even in their late 70s. Can I be one of them? I can overcome senility. And now that I'm attached, I can't envision taking that leap first, leaving someone behind alone. My kids may be self-sufficient, but they still want me around for theirs. My death would be incredibly selfish. At the end of the day, it's come to this. I've jumped off, and I haven't died of a heart attack, but I am going to die. But it's not too late to pull the cord. Maybe when I get to 75 or 77, I'll have a reason to live another day. But I can't know till I get there.
Let's end not with an answer, but a question, which is, what do you think? And we have a coffee break now, so I invite you to reflect on that question and chat about it. Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Matt and Anju.